And with that, very happy to now introduce Erik Summa of Dell Technologies, Patrick Curry of FarBridge, and Elizabeth Howard of 2K. Thank you all for joining us.
Okay, and as I share my presentation, I promise there will not be any gray bars, so we won't have to worry about it.
And Heather and I will go on audio and video mute once we see the deck is up. And it looks like you've got it up. Great. Take it away, guys.
Okay. Yeah, hey, how are you? Howdy. My name is Erik Summa, and I'm going to be co-presenting with Patrick and Elizabeth. And today we're going to talk about the present and the future of gaming. So let's begin here. So the structure of the conversation is going to first ground us in the gaming sector right now. And then we're going to talk a little bit about emerging technology and trends that we see in the industry, both in the present and also in the future. We're going to touch on a little bit of the non-gaming applications that you can leverage that technology for in some adjacencies. And then we're going to end with a panel QA. Okay. So to the surprise of no one probably on this presentation, gaming is a huge deal. And when we look at the numbers that back up that statement, we can see that the gaming market is set to reach 256 billion by 2025. And I don't know about my fellow presenters, but esports blew up in a way that I could have never imagined a few years ago. Esports is being enjoyed by 456 million people every year. And on top of that, esports is set to grow for 15% year over year, every year. And for the first time, League of Legends has more players watching than actually playing. And that is a really interesting statistic when you look at conventional sports, right? Like the NFL. And we'll be talking a little bit in more detail about that later in the presentation. And in summation, gaming is not just for nerds anymore. It's not a fringe thing. And the technology has a lot of broad use cases outside of gaming that we'll go over. And I think a lot of this technology could be used to better the world in a lot of really interesting ways. So the first thing that we'll talk about here is game streaming. And I'm sure you've seen a bunch of advertisements or a bunch of companies that have been working on this and have platforms. So we have things like NVIDIA, Xbox, Amazon, Google, they all have their separate platforms. And the technology has a lot of really amazing benefits, but it's not without some downsides, right? And so one of the things that it really does well is it untethers a person from their gaming environment that they typically play in, and it allows them to play on a broad variety of displays and areas that they wouldn't normally, right? A lot of people might be sitting at a desk in front of a PC, or might be in front of a TV playing a console game. It's upgradable in the sense that because the games are being streamed to a gaming server, that gaming server will constantly be upgraded as more people are playing, and you'll get a performance boost out of that, and your games might look better over time without you having to do anything on your end. There's also this pro about not having to pay this huge lump sum up front, right? So you can amortize it over time, and it really kind of allows people that don't have the means to actually buy something really expensive like a PlayStation 5 or a PC up front. And so that's a super great benefit. And some of these services also offer free games, not all, but some. And so you might pick up some games that you wouldn't normally experience or play if you had to buy, a $70 game, right? And with this technology being so new, there isn't without some drawbacks, right? The first thing is ecosystem. As I subscribe to one particular platform or service, I have to buy my games in that platform or service, right? These are non-transferable outside of that platform. So that's something to keep in mind. As these things kind of progress and grow, there could be a chance where one of these services just ends up going offline. And then what happens to your games, right? In an end of life situation, that just might go with the platform, which would be super unfortunate, but it's a possibility, right? And because these game streaming services are optimized for streaming, the developers might have to port their games over. So there might be some challenges in converting those games over to a format that is optimized for streaming. The next thing is there is a complete one-to-one relationship with you as a streamer. So there is no local multiplayer or split screens that are possible using split screen technology, using streaming technology, right? And that's something that you could do on a console, for example. And then the last thing, which is a little challenging to describe, but there's an inconsistency of quality that might be beyond your control as a person just trying to game. And we'll go into what latency actually means for those that don't really understand that in the next slide here. So there are, when you talk about game streaming, there are a lot of variables that might impact your enjoyment of playing that game. So let's just, for example, pretend that we're playing a streaming game. We have a controller in our hands and we push the jump button. Well, that input to jump will go into your Wi-Fi setup. That includes the router and your modem. And a lot of things impact how quickly that gets over there. So it could be how close or what's your proximity to your Wi-Fi and what's the speed of your hardware. After that, it goes to your internet service provider, which again, it all depends on what you've signed up for, what speed you've signed up for, and how far away are you from your internet service provider. And then after that, it basically goes to a gaming server. And again, location and proximity are really important. What are the specs of the gaming server? What optimizations does it have for game streaming? All of these things, once you get past your Wi-Fi, what's inside of your home is beyond your control, right? So the gaming server takes your input to jump, it renders a scene, and then it renders like an image or a video, and then it sends it back to you. So it goes through that same pipeline. And depending on all of those variables, you'll get latency, which is again, the distance in time between you pushing the jump button on your controller and when you see it your character actually jump, right? And then you have frame rate, which is how often the video stream gets updated. And then the resolution, everyone kind of understands that, right? The bigger, the better. And all of those things can change at any time. And game streaming services tend to prioritize latency. So when you click the jump button, you'll see that and lower the frame rate or the resolution just to make sure it feels responsive, right? If it's not, you'll get a bunch of rubber banding or micro blocking. It'll make the screen look pixelated, right? And when we look at games that have 60 frames per second, for example, each individual frame of that video is up on the screen for just 16 milliseconds. So you just have to imagine how quick all of this stuff has to happen. And again, things in that right side of that block are things that are outside of your control, things you can't cover or change. And so when we really think about how we might be able to address some of those issues, we can talk about Conceptnics, which is a Dell concept that we worked on internally and showed at CES. It basically moves that render, that game server into your house and allows multiple people in your household to stream at the same time, simultaneously. You own your gaming library, so all of that stuff is there. There's no need to rebuy games. And then you can play it on any device. So we're taking all the pros that you get with game streaming and trying to mitigate some of the cons in there. And it also allows you to have two people play on a TV at the same time. They could be the same game or they could be different games. And if you like tinkering with this stuff and think this is super cool, the innovation studio at Dell in Austin is hiring. So just something to consider there. And when I mentioned concepts, I mean, this isn't just a video. This is a working POC that we worked on and showed publicly. Super cool stuff. Okay, I think this is Elizabeth's slide. Patrick's?
No, it's Elizabeth.
Okay.
Also wanted to touch on, we'll touch on a few of these, but just evolutions in different business models and things impacting the business of video games. Front of mind is the subscription business. So I saw in the Slack, there are a number of questions of sort of what's going on with M&A. And fundamentally, the big one that we just saw with the Microsoft acquisition of Activision seems probably mostly motivated by their subscription business. Now, we all saw Metaverse kind of being the MSNBC buzzword of what would pay Microsoft to spend $68 billion on Activision. But first and foremost, Xbox has Game Pass. It's a subscription business that not only provides online services to Xbox players, but also access to games. And typically platform owners sort of like to have exclusive content in order to drive subscribers. And so there's a big argument to support the subscription business as part of that acquisition. Other entrants in the space, Apple Arcade has a subscription business as well, mostly targeting a much lower sort, I think it's $5 a month, where it's mobile games here, really focused on getting out of that free to play gameplay style and focusing on what would normally be premium games you pay a fee for. And then most recently, Netflix has introduced us to extending their subscription business by offering games through your phone right now. I bet you didn't even know it, but you can go to your Netflix app and play some games that Netflix is offering. And then, PlayStation and Nintendo also have similar subscription businesses, but have yet to show this sort of aggression, I guess, in the space that Microsoft has, although PlayStation bought Bungie this week for just under $4 billion. So subscription is definitely a big thing impacting the business right now. And I don't know when that'll slow down. I suppose when they stop getting all their money from all of us subscribers.
Nice. So another thing to talk about, and I know that there was some questions about this already, but the Metaverse and Web 3.0. When we talk about Metaverse, if you look up the definition, it's a reasonably broad definition. It's just a digital space where multiple users can congregate online, right? And a lot of you might be asking, like, what is it? Is it already here? Well, it all depends on your definition of what a metaverse is. If you look at the Meta, formerly known as Facebook, their definition of that is this hyper immersive place with these disembodied torsos where you can collaborate and talk with people. If you ask NVIDIA, their equivalent of what the metaverse is called the Omniverse. It's a very tactical approach for content creators to leverage all of these separate applications that all talk to each other and allow you to seamlessly generate content. I put this second bullet point in here already because from my previous conversation I had with the Austin Forum last year about the simulation and isn't life just a simulation? So that you could think about the metaverse as a life inside of a simulation inside of a simulation. So just thought I'd bring that back up. I think a lot of you guys were pretty freaked out by that notion, but it bears another conversation there. So future benefits and things to watch out for. Obviously, future benefits are, you're exposed to new types of people. You get to go to new exciting places. You can look however you want. You can talk however you want. And so just being able to collaborate with our fellow humans in a digital construct and that doesn't facilitate you having to travel somewhere sounds really awesome. The things to look out for in a hyper immersive environment is, screens attached to your face for 20 hours a day, right? I love technology and I work in it all the time, but that, we really need to be mindful about, how this technology impacts us and our lives and our well-being, right? Do I want to put a VR headset on and leave it on for 20 hours a day? I don't think so. And I don't think most people should do that. So we really need to be thinking about how we can engage with the metaverse in a really healthy way. Another thing to really think about is once these things start to get hyper realistic, just thinking about, regulation and how people communicate in there. We have laws for this reality, right, for a reason, and just to make sure that it's a safe place, and the things that you wouldn't do in the real world, we have to make sure that people don't do in the metaverse as it becomes hyper realistic. I think Elizabeth is going to talk a little bit more about Web 3.0, but some of these technologies really pair well with the metaverse. And you might be asking yourself, what is Web 3.0? It's just a collection of ideas. To me, it's a little bit hazy, but there's some really great features that like I said, pair really well with the metaverse. The one thing is that it's decentralized, and that's a really important fact for the metaverse. No one company should own the metaverse, right? It should be owned by everyone. It should be decentralized in a way that allows it to grow in a really nice way. Owning your data and deciding what you do with that data, who gets to see it, just seems like a really important thing, especially as we start to transition over to these hyper immersive mediums. And then the last thing is, because Web 3.0 is built on blockchain technology, it's really good for digital currency. And it might be really great to buy and sell things in this metaverse universe. And if you ask me what my definition of the metaverse is, I think it's already here, right? If you look at Fortnite and what they've been able to do, and how they've drawn in things that are not just the primary goal of the video game, which is to be the last person standing. They have all these really interesting other ways that people are leveraging it, right? If you look at their hyper interactive concerts and just teenagers using it just to chat with each other and express each other. It's super interesting. And I just added this little text that just said, Sony just bought Bungie. And Bungie, for those of you guys who don't know, is the developer for Destiny, right? Which is a hugely successful multiplayer online game. And I think that a lot of the strategy around that is around this metaverse idea. Bungie has done an amazing job of creating a sustainable fan base for their online shooter, and I think it's probably an objective for Sony to be a little bit more active as the definition of the metaverse kind of continues. Okay, is this Patrick?
Also Elizabeth.
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to chime in, but go for it, Elizabeth.
Yeah, we can all chime in. I think it's just intended to expand on sort of what is gaming doing with all this NFT stuff? Because I think, at first blush, and when I say NFT, I think the meme part of NFTs right now are overpriced, pieces of art that people value at an incredibly high dollar amounts. And that's not really what I mean when I think of NFTs in games or as it relates to games specifically is really ownership of a digital asset. And I do think that there's a ton of obvious and less obvious opportunities in gaming, but right now I think they're all frankly pretty nascent. And that's motivated by a few things. Like one, this is new to everybody. And certainly the established publishers are going to be leery of diving into something that frankly right now has a lot of controversy, not only around the environmental impact, but like, are we actually accomplishing something that we couldn't accomplish without it? Or are we just making people jump through a ton of hoops to kind of get in like Metaverse and NFT and blockchain in our public statements as we talk to investors. But specifically, I think where we will see opportunities continue to develop, out of game things like fan art, like being able to actually own pieces of art that you create in service of the games you love. And then, cool things like access-based NFTs. So as part of a digital pack as part of a game release, perhaps that comes with like a lifetime 5% savings on every transaction you ever buy for that game. So it's like there's some sort of other benefit. And then there's certainly digital collectibles that we will continue to see evolve, and then entirely new games based in the NFT space. And even now there are platforms emerging that are entirely funded by NFTs. But again, I think right now the challenge is, first of all, having the currency to be able to, buy and sell goods in the space is a pretty high skill bar. So like you can't just like charge things on your credit card as you would with normal game transactions. And so the games we're seeing created as a result of that sort of cater to that audience. We're not seeing games that are based in this sort of blockchain backed economy that are appealing to like more traditional gamers. So those things kind of have to work themselves out, I think, before we see how this fully impacts people. But certainly owning digital stuff makes a lot of sense for games. Anything to add, Patrick, on my spiel?
No, I think that's right on. I think, everything involving NFTs and blockchain, needs a healthy disclaimer that it's new and it's driven very much by speculation. And growing up as a kid in the 90s, I bought tons of comic books that were supposed to be worth millions of dollars someday, and surprised they're not, because they overprinted them and overproduced them, but they're still cool to have. And I still have a Spawn #1 somewhere in a cabinet or closet somewhere, but yeah, it's new. And so nobody knows in the long run which of these are going to be worth something, which of these are going to be supported, which platform is going to win. I saw Lindsay just mentioned Beanie Babies in chat. There's a tinge of, a gold rush and speculation, and, the tulip bulbs references come to mind. So we don't know, and I, if family and friends ask me like, hey, should I be investing in this? I tell them just that. I don't know. It's a probably riskier investment than anything else. But there's tons of technical research going on in the space, and an innovation happening, and we'll see who emerges on top. I saw Ben posted an interesting question asking, can the metaverse exist without NFTs? And to build on what Erik said, I think yes, absolutely, because today the games that are most like the metaverse are games like Destiny, Roblox, Minecraft, Fortnite, lots of games we'll talk some more about, and none of those are powered by blockchain right now. They're all completely privately owned and held closed ecosystems. Would it be great if there was an open or open source or distributed Fortnite or Minecraft? That would be pretty cool. Is someone going to invest $1 billion in that to create it? I don't know. I don't have the $1 billion to do it yet, but we'll see. So that's my addition on the NFT blockchain.
You just have to sell some NFTs and then you'll have your billion in no time.
Right. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
Well, and I think to double, like +1 on what Elsa, who I think is not actually Elsa, is saying in the chat, is that it really, like, the fundamental cool part is ownership of a digital good. So when you're in a game and like, say you like have crafted this character over time and that's incredible, like you could technically, backed by blockchain, be able to then sell that and trade that in a marketplace. It doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it. Like games have attempted that in the past, but they haven't really succeeded either. And so this seems like a cleaner way of potentially transferring ownership of in-game characters, items, etc. That again connects back to this like metaverse, like my persona in this alternate reality, and it has its life that it is curating its own stuff and wants to be able to trade goods in that space. And so not impossible, but blockchain seems to help.
Very
Agreed.
cool.
And this is kind of an expansion on that. So user-generated content, what I mean, UGC, the acronym we throw around in the biz, UGC, user-generated content. We have creators as entrepreneurs. So what I mean by that are like Roblox and Minecraft. You have economies that are created around like creators making content that they're then able to sell to other people in the game. And that's been an incredible evolution, I'd say, over the last decade. Not that it didn't exist prior to that, but we're seeing, Roblox is a publicly traded company now on sort of that premise. Creators as innovators, I think that's something that is potentially missed in the mainstream, acknowledging that a lot of these major games that we all hear about are actually derivative of mods, which is user-generated content. So Fortnite was brought to you by PUBG, which was brought to you by, I think it was like an Arma 2 mod, essentially, what gave us Battle Royale, which is now taking over a lot of first-person shooters. But the things to keep in mind there are, how are these creators compensated? How will we see that sort of creators as innovators continue to evolve? Like, where will we have entirely crowdsourced games like in non-Minecraft and Roblox? Like, we haven't really nailed that yet. Most of the AAA games, and when I say AAA, I mean like giant budgets, millions of dollars, are made by creators and teams of people. And then, I mean, child labor law is a little bit pedantic, but as some of you may have seen, like if you have a bunch of kids in this world making a bunch of content, what are the legal implications of that? What are the privacy implications of that, et cetera? And how will like companies balance those things when very clearly the future of all of this stuff is kids growing through various forms of gaming and online spaces. So yeah.
Absolutely. One quick add-on there about the legacy and sort of maturity of mods or game modifications as a part of the industry. I got into the industry by making mods to my favorite games, and somewhere between hacking them and decompiling them and changing them the way that they work to change games like Doom and Quake is how I learned a lot of game development and met fellow kids online. I mean, we were literally kids in the early days, who are now in the industry like me doing these things. And you better believe it, had there been a pipeline for us to try to monetize skins, maps, levels, gameplay, new rules, we would have been selling them back then. And so I think this is a natural evolution of just kids' fascination and desire to make things and figure out how to make things tick. But I definitely do agree. We got to figure out how to make this a safe ecosystem for kids and not exploitive.
Awesome.
This isn't necessarily new at all, but I think it's worth recognizing, because I think, most people, when you hear free to play, maybe think of like Candy Crush. And while that the mobile app free to play business is certainly motivated by, there's a lot of that in there. It's also worth recognizing some of the top sellers on Steam, as an example, Steam being the #1 distribution platform for PC games, at least outside of China. I don't know if that includes China. Includes 3 free-to-play games, meaning they're free to download and you're paying for using real money to buy things or buy things in game. The other thing worth noting in this list is that a number of these titles are really old. And this doesn't include League of Legends, which I think came out in 2012. So when, to kind of tie it back to this, are we in the metaverse already? I mean, I think the art is like, we're pretty much there in a lot of ways, and that people have these established communities online that they access for years and years and years, have friends that they meet by virtue of that. Anybody in gaming knows somebody who is married to somebody who met in World of Warcraft, I guarantee you. But those are the kinds of relationships. I mean, I have teenagers in my house and we've like met in real life, they're online friends. Just pointing out, free to play doesn't mean mobile. It's everything now, and these games last a long, long time.
Did PUBG just recently transition over to a free to play?
I
don't know about that.
I don't know if it's launched yet, but they did announce that they were doing it. And I think that's an interesting point to make is that really free to play at this point is a marketing tactic, right? Like, you know, how do you get your game to stand out? Well, you can spend lots of money on marketing, and then try to convince someone to give you $50, $60 before they play the game. Or you can still spend lots of money on marketing, let someone play your game for free, and then hope that they hang out and play enough with their friends that they're compelled to buy things in your game. And it's been very fascinating to watch how free to play has grown and sort of taken over. I think, you know, my personal focus is more on the PC console VR side of things, so a little bit less free to play there. But in mobile, it's completely dominant. There's very few games that are not free to at least try out and start playing before they try to show you ads or sell you something in the game. Wordle will have ads in it within 30 days.
Hope not. Yeah, the consolidation continues, right?
Yeah, so the backstory there is New York Times, I think, bought Wordle,
yeah,
which makes sense. You know, they have a business with their crossword games and Sudoku, and Wordle's you know, it's a fun little game and a good compliment. I'm sure that my mom and aunt would love Wordle if they're not already playing it.
nice.
All right, so I get to talk about really nerdy stuff here. You know, some of the business trends that I'm really fascinated in right now have to do with how games and mass media and culture are just really bleeding together right now. And, you know, I think back to teenage me, who was, you know, dreaming about making games of my own. And, you know, games were very siloed, right? There was a Super Mario game and some sequels, and there was a Zelda game and some sequels. And there were branded or licensed games, right? Everyone knows the story of the famous E.T. game for the Atari 2600, or the bad Superman or Ghostbusters game from that era. But by the Nintendo era, they started getting good, right? You get DuckTales, you get the Batman game for the NES and Game Boy. Big shout out to Sunsoft. But a few years ago, we started seeing this cool thing happening in games where these stories and characters just started getting smashed together, right? We would call them mashups or remixes, but I really think it's in a lot of ways the beginning of the metaverse. And I think what was happening is the big brands, the big companies were kind of distracted, right? And, you know, and Disney did a deal with Square, who had just made Final Fantasy, and they're like, hey, we want to like put a lot of your characters in a game with our characters. And Disney's like, yeah, how much are you going to pay us? Sure, go for it. And that ended up being Kingdom Hearts. And, you know, nobody knew it was going to be this big hit, but I really think it shook Disney. I didn't work there then, but I worked there years later. And I think it was a big turning point where Disney was like, hey, people are interested in our characters, not just for what they do today in movies or in TV, but what they could do in games. And then, of course, Nintendo took all of their characters and then started scooping up everybody else's characters and put them into this great fighting game franchise called Smash Brothers. And all of a sudden, you had Mario and Link and Samus and all these characters and games together. Now Pac-Man's in there, and you know, Snake from Metal Gear Solid. Totally unexpected. You know, teenage Patrick is just like jumping for joy at this point. Like, they did it! It's amazing. And I think games again was an industry where you could do this experimentation because it's a wild idea. You know, like, you got to remember, this is pre-Marvel Cinematic Universe movies. This is pre-Infinity War, where, you know, everything you love is smashed into one thing. Games are really pushing forward here and innovating, and probably arguably pulling from comic books. And then a couple more recent examples is, you know, Disney, again, not to be outdone by other people, sees what's happening with Skylanders and Kingdom Hearts, and they say, hey, we're going to make a toy line called Disney Infinity. We're going to put all of our characters together, and somehow they pulled it off where Disney characters are in the same games interacting with Pixar characters, with Marvel characters, and Star Wars characters. It's like, imagine everyone from Disney Plus is in a big giant video game together. And that would have never have happened in one of the Disney animation studios, but it could happen in video games because, you know, the, you know, mass market, big name media thinks, oh, those game guys are crazy, they'll try anything. And then another favorite crossover is, you know, Sub-Zero, one of my favorite characters from Mortal Kombat series. He can now appear in other games, like he's in the Injustice games fighting Superman. That's completely unheard of, but super cool. And again, just a great crossover. And we'll talk more about Superman in a minute. So you have this brewing, and this has been brewing the last 10 years, I think. Yeah, Disney Infinity is about 10 years old, I think. Okay, well, let's go to the next slide. We're just getting going with this crazy mashup. Fast forward to today, what we're seeing is that we're finally getting these good mainstream media out of video games that we've always wanted. Now, I'm a big fan, the 1993, 94 Mortal Kombat movie, but arguably the new one is better, right? And we've got Detective Pikachu in a live action Pokemon movie. It's amazing. And Netflix makes a great Witcher TV series. They somehow fixed the Sonic the Hedgehog movie so he doesn't look like a deformed rat and looks like Sonic. And it's actually a pretty good movie. Teams up with Cyclops. Not literally, just the actor who plays Cyclops. Or another example is Arcane, animated series on Netflix based on League of Legends. Fascinatingly enough, they also have an animated series based on Dota 2. They're going all in on MOBAs. What we're seeing is high quality bar entertainment coming out of games back to the mainstream because there are these huge fan bases. You know, you have entire generations of kids who have grown up with Pokemon and Sonic and want to see these things. And of course, Witcher and League of Legends have huge fan bases who have clocked thousands of hours in these games. So they're happy to see their characters, their stories, the things that they love, come back to them in a new form. And I think this is a really interesting play because games can have this phenomenon of truly not just hundreds, but thousands of hours of engagement. I can spend thousands of hours playing and replaying Metal Gear Solid games, arguably more than I can rewatch, my favorite spy movies, because it's, the games are different every time I play. And that goes for almost any game with RPG elements or some replayability to it. And I think that that's something that these media companies are aspiring to, right? Netflix, Disney Plus, et cetera. They're aspiring to having you on their platforms more and more for longer and longer engagement sessions. And of course, there's one more upcoming video game to media crossover event I'm really excited about. If you hit the next slide, Eric. Thank you. The Halo TV series. The trailer was dope. I'm a huge fan, fanboy even, and I'm really excited about it. Is it going to be the same experience as playing Halo with my friends, running around as a space marine, shooting aliens? No, it's going to be something different. But just like the giant, mega grossing, very profitable movies have been the Marvel movies, arguably selling us back our childhood from comic book form as these big movies. I think these gaming franchises are going to continue to do this with film and TV, and we're going to see more and more. Okay, so I know I'm rambling a little bit. Eric and Elizabeth, you want to get in on this?
Yeah, I think what's really nice about the crossover here is a lot of the examples that you're showing here have really rich environments and stories and backgrounds. And I think that the people that adapt these over to these other mediums do an excellent job of transferring that over. And I think that's really where you can play a game and then watch a TV show and feel like it's part of the same universe is really, it's got to be hard, but I think that they've been doing a really good job of that recently.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that they're taking inspiration from things like the Marvel movies, things like long-running anime series that have shown that fans will consume these big, huge, epic stories and follow them for years and years, like Dragon Ball Z or Avatar and Korra. It's not without precedent, but I'm personally super excited to see my favorite characters and worlds brought to life in these new ways.
Well, and I think the same way licensing a brand or IP and making a game out of it helps like de-risk an investment by bringing a story and character and space to a game. Now the converse is true for like flat screen media or whatever you call it. A lot of them kids spend more time in video games than on watching TV or movies. So it's in a way for Netflix and others to attract that customer to their platform that they might miss out on because they're just not interested in that kind of content anymore. So it is interesting to see the power of video game IPs like come out of just games and turn into apparel and TV shows and movies. And I don't think it'll stop. I think anybody who's got kids who play games in the house, like would be much more interested in going to video game land world than Disney World now, like going to a place where you could ride Halo rides and do cool stuff with Pokemon. Like,
Does that exist?
that would be a successful theme park.
I know they've opened a few theme parks that are Mario themed, right?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Didn't one
Yeah,
open in
Japan,
Japan?
right? Yeah. Mhm.
But building on what y'all have been talking about, it's kind of interesting because I think Patrick and I are in the same boat of like, oh, we've consumed the hyper nerdy thing when it wasn't, out in the world as a TV show. But you could imagine the inverse of that happening, where something pops up for The Witcher, someone consumes that content and loves it, and then starts to play the video game. I think I had seen that after they released the first season of The Witcher, the Witcher game was up in the, people were buying the game in mass right after that release. So it could go both ways too, which is super interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we go to the next slide, we could touch on that and the phenomenon that I've seen happening, which is the way that my son learns about pop culture is by playing Fortnite. And we've seen this really new thing. I think this is getting to the future part, getting to this Metaversy part that I just haven't seen before, which where in the olden days, you had original game characters like Mario or Master Chief and Halo, or you had licensed games. And lots of my favorite games are licensed games. I love Batman Arkham Asylum. It's a near perfect game. But that's one game you buy with Batman in it, and you're only ever Batman. And now what we're seeing is these characters from other forms of entertainment, from comic books, from film, from television, coming into our video games, not starring in their own video game, but just as a supporting player, right? So one of my favorite horror franchises is Scream. They have Ghostface, the name of their antagonist. He's in a horror game called Dead by Daylight, along with a whole, rogues gallery of villains from horror films. And it's a really interesting thing because you don't go to the store and say, hey, I want to buy the Scream video game, or I want to buy the Friday the 13th video game. You say, hey, I want to play Dead by Daylight, and it has all of them in it. Or similarly, playing Fortnite, you can play as almost any character you can imagine from comics, film, pop culture. They had Superman in the game. So again, I'm going to pick on one of my favorite Superman. So here's Superman, the beacon of light and happiness and, good old American values. And he can run around with an AK-47 and shoot other people. He can shoot stormtroopers. He can shoot John Wick. It's completely ridiculous. It doesn't really matter. And if you're Warner Brothers, I have to think that they say, hey, kids are spending so much time in these online worlds playing with each other. Let's let them play with a Superman action figure and come beat up a John Wick action figure who's the guy in the bottom right. And that's okay. And I think that there's this interesting thing where we've crossed over into saying, hey, it's no longer literally these characters, or it's no longer literally a Scream story or a Superman story or a John Wick story. We're letting the players make their own stories. They're making their own content. They're having their own experiences in this crazy mashup world of video games that we've created. And at this point, these are multi-billion dollar businesses, as we've seen in the last few weeks, that is letting all of this happen. And I think it's only going to continue to the point where characters, worlds, stories, and players are going to be all collaborative in these games within games, to the point where you have to think about it. It's like a metaverse, all mashed up together. And just to name what the other example there in the bottom left is that's the 1989 Batmobile in Rocket League. So that's a game where you literally play soccer as race cars. And of course, the Batmobile is a car that you can purchase and play as there. So now we've gone full circle. It's not just Sonic appearing in his own video game that doesn't suck finally. We're also seeing all of these other characters from our favorite worlds and stories appearing in our games. And it starts getting really crazy on the next slide. I'm sorry, before we go to the next slide, anything else, Elizabeth, Eric, you want to add here?
No, I'm good. Yeah.
Okay, I teed it up. I just got you on that cliffhanger. So here's where it gets crazy, right? We now have this notion of our characters in the world. When my son and I are hanging out in a game like Fortnite or even Sea of Thieves, We're pirating on the seven seas up to no good. The digital clothes that we wear, how we style our hair, our eye patches, if we're Superman or John Wick, that's visible by all the other players. And turns out there's a whole industry that's interested in this notion of selling you things to wear, and it's the fashion industry. And so what we're seeing now is that fashion brands, so here's some examples from Gucci on the left, creating characters and accessories that you can purchase and use in Pokemon Go, very, very popular game. Or they did a Fortnite crossover with Balenciaga. I may mispronounce that, apologies. I didn't know that fashion brand before it was in Fortnite. My kids didn't know that fashion brand before it was in Fortnite, but now we all do, and we've all talked about it. And so this is marketing money well spent for these brands who can now sell us completely make-believe clothes and items for us to wear in our make-believe video games, but importantly, seen by other real human beings. And some of these items, whether it's a super rare Catwoman skin that I'm still mad I wasn't able to purchase for the 3 days that it was on sale in Fortnite, or a $100 hoodie from a designer brand, it has status. And, if my son sees one of his friends, wearing some super rare badass item, he's gonna be like, oh, where'd you get that? How'd you get that? That's so cool. And that's really interesting. And that's where we see things like fashion and trends that you're used to in the real world fashion industry crossing over and influencing us in games. So this is totally brave new world, uncharted territory. I'm very curious to see where it goes in the future.
That ties back into what Elizabeth was talking about with this freemium kind of a economy, right? Where this quest for it, to stick out or express yourself in a different way really comes into play with what you're discussing here.
Right. I forget who it was. So if you're a friend of mine and you're on the call, I apologize if I'm stealing your analogy, but someone said that it's sort of like if you said, hey, everybody, don't pay to come into Disneyland. And then in Disneyland, you can buy more stuff, which is sort of the old buy a game and then buy a DLC model. It's more like they said, hey, come into Disneyland. It's free. There's tons of cool things to do here. Don't forget, you can buy lots of merch and lots of beer with real money. Tell your friends. And it's working. It's working in these large games within games where people are spending more and more time online and more time together.
Yep. In that Disney World scenario, the beer was for you and the merch was for your kids.
Mostly.
Nice. That works. Cool. So let's talk a little bit about some emerging technology that might be in some of the video games specifically. So we're going from high-level concepts to now just some technology that might be in the games that you are playing now or soon. The first thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is deep learning super sampling. And that's just a fancy way of saying you can do more with what you already have. There's a specific chip that is required for this to work, but essentially, in a nutshell, let's say you want to play a game at a certain resolution of 4K, for example. You might turn that on and you might put up all of your effects and the frame rate might be really low. And so what DLSS does for you as a gamer is it actually runs the resolution at a lower resolution, like 720, and then it dynamically upscales it to 4K with minimal loss in quality. So it's almost like you've rendered it in native 4K, but your PC isn't working as hard and rendering at 720 and then dynamically upscaling it. It doesn't seem like it makes much sense, but what they've done is trained an AI on an individual game level, what gameplay looks like at 4K, and then what gameplay looks like at 720p. And they've trained a model that can actually do this stuff automatically. It sounds like magic. And And it certainly feels like magic when you see the performance gains that you get when you turn this on, but it's definitely something, that we'll see more and more of as we start to transition to higher and higher fidelity video game. So leveraging these things really doesn't have you lose quality as you're playing. It really just helps you with performance. The next thing, I know I've talked about this before in a previous conversation, but it's worth mentioning again, is this concept of foveated rendering. So let's use the same scenario again. I wanna play this game at a super high resolution. So I wanna play this game at 8K because it looks amazing, and I have a monitor that supports that. Well, the only problem with that is with the increased pixel density, your game's performance is gonna suffer. One of the ways that you can mitigate that is by using foveated rendering, which requires eye tracking, and it essentially just plays on how your eyes work. So as if you're looking at something, the focal point of what you're looking at is super high resolution, and you start to lose resolution as you go to the periphery of your vision. And what this does is actually play and understand your eye and leverage that in the way that you render. So the center part of where you're looking, wherever you're looking on the screen, could be 8K. And then the rest of it could render at a lower resolution because you're not going to see it anyway. And it's a super crafty, super interesting thing that just plays on the way that your eyes already work. And so you can see a little visual of how that might look. In that center square, it's super high resolution. As you go out, it gets blurrier and blurrier. This rendering technique, I don't know if you guys have seen it, but PlayStation just announced their new VR headset. It uses foveated rendering. And again, the reason why they want to use it in their VR headset is because you really need high frame rates in order to not get sick. So you're looking for a minimum of 90 frames a second, ideally 120. And so this will help them get there. And I included this little image on the lower left-hand corner just to say that these are concentric circles, and the reason why it radiates out in lower resolution like that is because of our pupil shape. And so because we have circular pupils, that's the way that the resolution radiates out. If we were to make a VR headset for a cat, I'm not really sure why we would do that, but the shape would be more of an oval, and for a goat, it would be even weirder. So for people that want to create foveated rendering for those eyeballs, that's a plan of attack there. The next thing I want to talk about is ray traced lighting. And this basically is a way to create realistic lighting via dynamic reflection, light bounce simulation. So these are all basically simulations that were impossible to do in real time previously. In video games previously, you'd have to bake in the light, which basically means you'd have these really crisp, nice lighting in a room. But that was all pre-rendered and it couldn't be moved, right? So it's just a static light that looks really great. With ray tracing, you can actually have that be dynamic. So you could walk through light shafts and have the light reflect off of your character. You could run through puddles and have the reflection dynamically change as you're rippling through it. And so what you're seeing on the leftmost image is pre-baked light, right? So it looks quite different than the one on the right side. So you can see immediately that the light is coming into the room, bouncing off of the objects in the room, and taking the materials of those objects that it's bouncing onto into consideration as the light bounces around the room. And so it's really trying to replicate exactly what life does in our reality, right? And so it really adds to the immersion and the realistic part of a game. And ray tracing can be done with software, and it can be done with hardware. It's ideally leveraging hardware that's dedicated to processing specifically for ray tracing lighting. But it's definitely a thing that we'll see more and more of as graphics start to get to that point where everyone can buy a graphics card that supports this. And you're seeing this in PlayStation 5. You're seeing this in high-end PC gaming right now, but you'll see it more and more as time goes by. The next thing I wanted to talk about is level of detail, or LOD is what they call it in the industry. And there's a really interesting thing happening here in game engines. So imagine that you've been tasked, you're a game developer, and you've been tasked to create a Matrix video game. And so one of the things you might want to do to get a leg up is just go and call Warner Brothers and say, hey, I know you have all of these high resolution models that you use in the movie. I'd love to use them in the video game. So, hey, you got a model of Neo, like send that my way and I can just throw it in the video game, right? In an ideal world, that would be awesome to just do that. But that's not really how that works. In a video game, you have a lot of constrictions and restrictions around how much detail you can show in a particular scene. So that if you were to just toss that in, the game performance would be really bad, right? It takes server farms to render individual screens from movies, right? And you'd really just have to lower the resolution, lower the detail on those models to put it into a video game. And what we're seeing right now in video game engines is that the engines dynamically handle the detail based on what hardware you're using on it. So this is a game that just recently came out. It's called Matrix Awakens. It was made by Unreal for the movie that came out. They actually used the character models from the Matrix movies and just plopped it in. And so the game engine really helped just scale that down to a manageable level of detail for the gaming platform that you were using to look at it on, which is just amazing, right? And let's say that you wanted to create this huge city, and you wanted to have it be populated with cars and trucks and buildings and roads. There's an insane amount of detail. And one of the things that would have to be done, because we're looking so far back, is you have to scale the level of detail for the things that are in this image. So for example, if you look at the buildings all the way in the back, right? If you rendered that building in high resolution, a lot of those details are lost because we're really far away from them, right? And so as game developers, they would create multiple instances of that building, right? So depending on how far away you are, it might be low resolution. And as you get closer to it, the model will swap for something more high resolution as you get closer and closer to it. And in games previously, depending on how fast you were moving, you might catch the game engine swapping out that asset, right? And so and it's really distracting when you see it. You just called like pop in. And so basically with game engines right now, again, this is from that Matrix Awakens video game, you just have to put in one high resolution asset and the game engine will automatically scale the complexity of those objects in that scene. And so it just really helps streamline the pipeline. It increases the quality of the visuals that you're seeing. And it really just helps just in general, like with the game creation. It's super interesting stuff. It seems like, well, yeah, duh, like game engines should automatically do that. But this is really amazing work. And I think when we think about how we're talking about movies and video games kind of one creating the other one, I think this is a really awesome pipeline that could make the creation of those movies or the creation of those games a lot easier, right? And it would create consistency between the two and save a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I'm thinking of like The Mandalorian, which I know has done a lot of work with video game engines. If they could be creating, a model of a speeder bike or an X-Wing or Mandalorian armor once, and then it's instantly usable in film or television or games, that's a huge time savings and cost savings. And then also adds to more immersion where if I'm in the game and then I see it on the show and it looks the same and it's got the same dent in the helmet or whatever, plot point is important to you for your favorite character, that's awesome. And less that everybody has to go do by hand.
Yep, totally. Cool. So let's transition a little bit and talk about some non-gaming benefits that might result from some of the advancements in the video game industry. Obviously, like the things that come to mind whenever you kind of broach this subject with people is education, right? Like I don't know about you guys, but I think a lot of people on this call might be visual learners. I will take an immersive tour through a historical time period, in ancient Egypt, any day of the week over trying to read about that, right? And so there's something really amazing about using this immersive technology to go to that place and be inside of that place and really just kind of experience it on a more, first person detail, I think is amazing. And I think Patrick has actually built some amazing educational video games around that idea. Is that right?
Yeah, we did some virtual tours of very, very accurate recreations of endangered historical sites from locations around the world. And yeah, it's a very immediate and visceral way to take people to places they've never been, but then also hopefully develop empathy for the challenges and threats that these locations face around the globe.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think when you think about training, you immediately think of like people like truck drivers and immersive simulations, like a person trying to be a pilot. But it's not just for those professions anymore. I think Walmart is starting to try and virtualize some of their training. I think especially when it comes to something like customer service. I don't know if anyone will want to do a trial by fire for an upset customer, but maybe, having that be as immersive as possible in a safe environment and trying to de-escalate, in the comfort of a VR headset might be a really great way to learn some soft skills. And so, yeah, I think that's awesome. The last thing that I wanted to talk about is empathy, and I know Patrick just touched on that just a little bit, but when I think about a person trying to learn something new about people that are different from them, come from different backgrounds and have different experiences, I think the world could be a better place by having more empathy in it, right? And I think if you wanted to learn more about, people that might have a different background or diverse background from you, you might want to read a book or watch a movie or a documentary about that. And, that would be a really great way to learn about those things. But to take it a next level, to be, to put on a headset and experience these things from a first person perspective is extremely powerful. And it's extremely good at feeling empathy, about feeling like you're that person that is experiencing these things. I think is extremely powerful. And I think I think this is a fantastic use for immersive media.
Absolutely. I think games have always been a way to safely and hopefully healthfully explore different perspectives, whether it's a completely make-believe world or a different social scenario or situation than you're used to, or taking on and trying out a different identity. I think that like all technology, this has to be wielded cautiously, maturely, responsibly, and kind of touching on, one of the things we've come back to a few times is that, all of this new technology does raise new questions about the ethics of these scenarios, the safety, who is this content for, who is this content not for, and eventually it's going to need laws and regulations that makes that all make sense. So, I'd encourage anyone who's working on the cutting edge of any of these technologies or other technologies, keep that in mind, have an ethicist, if not on staff, on speed dial. So you can just be like, hey, we're in a tricky situation. How should we deal with this? And yeah, there have been times where we've reached out to experts or, professional ethicists to talk through like, hey, what are the ethics of XYZ and how do we proceed in a way that we would want to be, held accountable for or put our name on it in the future. Oh, we're getting the clock from Jay, Eric.
We're not going to play you off the stage with music, mostly because we don't have that set up. But I do want to make, there we go. Perfect timing. Now,
yes.
I know you guys had some questions you wanted to ask each other before we move to audience questions. We are really at the time for audience questions, but maybe we could get lightning answers from each of you on your internal questions.
We could shift directly to the QA from the audience.
Well, I want to see one or two of your questions because I want to see your answers. I know what's in there. So the first one's real quick.
Okay. Okay. So we asked the audience this. So what's your favorite game of all time?
Well, this is for you three, the audience. If you're in the audience and you haven't contributed, please feel free, but we want to hear from the speakers now.
For me, Super Mario 3 was sort of the end of my gaming journey. I quit gaming in 89. I think it was the summer of 89 is probably the last time I really played games hardcore outside of Plants vs. Zombies and Solitaire, which are my favorite playing favorites.
Nice.
I mean, it's a near perfect answer. I would argue Super Mario Brothers 1.
I couldn't adapt to the 3D thing. So.
I would actually argue Super Mario Galaxy. I thought Super Mario Galaxy was perfect.
It's pretty great.
Eric,
what's your answer?
I took of all time as a suggestion and put 1,000 games on here that I really like. So yeah, I'm with you. Super Mario 1. It's an amazing game. There's this really amazing, cool thing that they do in the beginning to try and teach you the mechanics of the game in a very thoughtful way, like a learn by doing type of thing, where you understand what the mushroom is, you understand what the enemies are, and how high you can jump and all that good stuff. I also thought Half-Life Alyx had an amazing tutorial where you can pick up everything, and there's this whiteboard area right in the beginning of the game, and you're like, I wonder if I could pick up like a marker and start writing on things. And it's amazingly interactive, and it helps you understand what is and what is out of play when it comes to solving some puzzles later in the game. People have done entire physics lessons inside of Half-Life Alyx and just leveraged the whiteboarding alone in the beginning of the game. And I think that's amazing, super immersive. Dark Souls, I think anyone who's played that Prepare to Die edition is a thing that you'll be doing a lot. I love how hard it is, but it's also fair. It's tough but fair, right? Every time that you die in that game, it's a result of your own incompetence. The Last Guardian is a game we talked a lot about empathy and kind of feeling feelings. You have this giant non-player character like cat bird thing that you can direct and pet and help you solve puzzles. The interesting part of this game was that the cat bird thing kind of somewhat listens to you, and sometimes it just goes off and does its own things and plays with butterflies and stuff like that. It really teaches you, it really makes you feel like it's a real thing, like a real pet. And it made me, there are portions of the game you become so attached to this animal that it elicits strong emotion in you. So this is one of the first games where I've ugly cried, not just like the shed a tear. It's like the heaving, can't breathe kind of crying. And so any sort of medium that can do that to me. Well, I am a sensitive person, but any, crying like that it makes the format feel special. I think Until Dawn, someone mentioned that in the chat. Props to you. I would say I really like this game because it merges entertainment mediums like movies and video games into one thing. Hayden Panettiere, I hope I'm saying that right, is a main character in it, and my wife really loves her. So this really kind of brought her into playing games, and this is the first time ever where she was like, "Let's boot up that game and see what happens next," kind of thing. And for me, that's like, tug on my heartstrings, kind of thing. All I see is hearts, when she asked me to play video games. And then, yeah, Undertale, which flips game mechanics on their heads. Usually it's about killing things. In this game, it's really about friendship and who is the real monster kind of thing. And I really love it. It's a recent game. It looks like a Nintendo game, but it's amazing and everyone should play it. Sorry, that was a lot,
Eric,
but
we're gonna have to go to audience questions now just to make sure we get everything in. So
got it. Sorry.
No worries. So thank you guys very much. Audience, you all have submitted some great questions. We will not get to all of those in this session, but Heather's going to pick a few, and then we're going to try to talk them into answering some questions over the next week. Hopefully I can twist some arms here. I don't know Elizabeth well enough to twist her arm, but I'm going to try. But I know Patrick and Eric can be bought with whiskey. So we'll see what we can do to answer more questions this week. But Heather, why don't you pick a few right now and ask our panelists?
Okay, this was an early question from Lindsay Jensen. How much is accessibility being thought of when it comes to the future of gaming? How realistic is it that major companies will put an emphasis on making things as accessible as possible so that all players can play?
It's a great question. I think that there's a lot of great strides being done with some of the accessible controllers you're seeing from Microsoft and Logitech. I think that we've also, like, as game, I'm not a game publisher, but game publishers have done a lot of work. Like I can think off the top of my head, the most recent Gears of War and The Last of Us 2 have done a great job of creating options in the game to help people that might not have might have color blindness or might be hard of hearing or hard of hearing, can't see certain colors or can't see in a certain level of fidelity. I've also seen a bunch of really interesting work using EEG, which is just a helmet that you stick on your head from MIT that allows you to think of actions and have them be translated over to video games. I think there's some really interesting things there. The only problem with it is that every brain is a unique and beautiful butterfly. So there is some training involved, but I am seeing some really interesting things.
Wonderful. Let's see. Another question. Predicting this is from Karthik Srinivasan. Predicting the success of video games beforehand is notoriously difficult. This is despite many publishers conducting focus group tests, surveys, and employing other techniques typically used by marketers in other consumer products with greater success. Has there been any research, or do the panelists have any opinion to identify the critical success factors that increase the odds of a game's success?
Not loaded at all.
A super good question. It's almost my entire job. The short answer is no. Like, I don't think there is a way to distill down, like, and clearly articulate, if we do these things, we will definitely get XYZ outcome, right? But there are tons of data sets that we can draw from to help inform that. And my current philosophy, and the thing that I know that we aspire to do, is it starts really beginning with, like, who is the customer, and partnering with the developer. As a reminder, I work in publishing, so I don't make the games, I partner with the people who do. Who is the customer, and how are we, like, addressing their needs with this game? And then data to help support that journey all along from the very beginning. And so The flip side of that is a number of the big successes in our industry in the last year were not that at all. Like Among Us was this game that like kind of was living for a bunch of, I think, years, and then the right Twitch streamer got their hands on it, and I think like Epic bought them, right? And millions of people bought this game that 4 people I think made. So, you know, it's not a science. And I actually spent the weekend with my friends who work in oil and gas, and I was like, you guys run projects and it's like science, and like we run projects that are creative. And so no, it's not perfect. It's hard.
That makes sense. All right. Question. This is from Roly Cole. What technologies not yet widely spread will make the biggest difference in gaming, in your opinion?
Not yet widely spread.
Not yet widely spread. There's a
I mean,
corollary. Someone else asked about the effects of quantum computing on gaming, if at all.
Well, you'll never know what the outcome is. Sorry, bad quantum joke. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I mean, I think we're at the point now where, you know, and Eric highlighted a lot of, frankly, my favorite technologies, and a lot of the research that's going on in games is very exciting. But more and more we're seeing creativity, characters, uniqueness matter in games standing out, and you know, surprising us in new ways. You know, being surprised is frankly something I really value in entertainment, and there's only so much that technology can do to surprise us compared to
What about introducing a more advanced AI into the games? And I don't mean just for specific instances within games, but within the entire world, so that outcomes are very different. How about that?
I think that AI is a fascinating way that can happen. Some of my favorite games use AI to make unique events happen when you least expect them, or to surprise you and try to respond to the player's actions, or even go so far as creating the stories as you play.
Yeah.
I think that's yeah, that's a great answer, Jay. We're going to trade seats next time we do this. But yeah, I mean, if I could interact with a character in a video game the same way I'm interacting with y'all tonight, and have a believable, memorable, positive experience, that would be pretty dang cool. So scary, but cool.
Oh, by the way, the corollary was a question about quantum computing was from Deshaun Aaron, just to kind of clarify. Elizabeth, you were saying something.
I would just, you know, when we think of the future of gaming, I mean, the reminder is there is still a huge, like billions of people on the planet today that don't have access to the internet or technology to engage with gaming, and like that will change. And so with that means so many different contributors to the ecosystem that have not been a part of it yet, not just as consumers, but as creators. And to kind of Patrick's point there, like that's where we start even seeing more and more diversity and sort of the experiences that we get, as well as like how are they receiving them, because they're probably not playing an Xbox, it's probably some like phone like that's kind of old, and all of those things. So yeah, I think just access to technology will really change things.
That leads directly into this question from Patrick Zavala. Question: how can the future of gaming be used to alleviate economic disparities and help to close income gaps nationally and globally? Ooh.
I have strong thoughts on this one too. It's kind of metaversy, but I mean, like a reminder is like we're talking about potentially commoditizing access to education through places people already go and enjoy themselves. So that's where I think like leveraging like what is already fun and attractive about gaming, then expanding what people do in that space, including things like education, is like really exciting to think about and could be really pivotal in changing access to that stuff.